Now, Indian tech contributes roughly 7% of India's GDP. It captures just 1% of the world's fastest growing tech value pools. And honestly, that's not a critiques number, it's from BCG's own report published in February, co-authored by today's guest, who I am extremely excited to have a conversation with. I'm, of course, talking about Mr. Snehil Gambhir, who's the Managing Director and Partner of BCG India. He's joining me today exclusively on Front Page to discuss what lies ahead as far as the GCC ecosystem is concerned. Welcome to Front Page, sir. How are you doing?
Hi, Sudhi. Good morning. I'm doing great, and thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure. Really looking forward to this conversation. All right, so I want to kick it off by setting a context, Snehil. So I want to go ahead and talk about the report first, which is India's Tech Next Innings. This was the title of the report, published February of 2026. So if you were to describe this, what does that 7% versus 1% gap actually mean? And why did it need, in some sort of an emphasis as of right now? And are you playing on the front foot because it's the next innings?
So look, Sudhi, I think India has always been recognized as a superpower in the idea of providing tech-enabled services and knowledge services, right? And that has led us from being outsourcing capital to now being a capability center capital for quite some time. And I think that India has benefited from the availability of large talent pools, of a very, very strong workforce that is diligent to make the right progress. And I think the Global Capability Center ecosystem has provided that platform to make that the core part of being a contributor to every organization. In that context, I think when we look at the contribution and the revenue that the GCCs in India drive, we're looking at about 100 billion. At this stage, we're ahead of most projections. And to your earlier opening comment about number of GCCs as well, I think we've seen a very large uplift in the number of GCCs that have come on board post-COVID, particularly in the last couple of years, where we're averaging give or take 2 a week, right? And not just in numbers of GCCs, but also in new models of how these GCCs are coming about, which is fairly different from what started 20 some years ago with some of the large majors that we all know of.
Honestly speaking, when you hark back to 20 years back, Snehil, it was honestly very derogatory when one of the terms was called capture, if I remember correctly. And I thought that was very, for the lack of a better word, very uncool. But anyway, now, of course, it's capability, etc. I honestly, very quickly want to ask you this. When will that mindset change in terms of them not being referred to as GCCs, etc.? Why can't they just be called the India office?
Oh, that's spot on, Sudhi, and I couldn't agree with you more. So I think we've evolved from like I said, an outsourcing play to delivery centers, to captives, to capability centers. And one of the things that we are seeing a lot of, and particularly not to toot our own horn, but if I look at some of us that work in this space and advise global clients, the one thing we tell them, and I call it the blinds test, right? When you have the blinds down and you are in the office of any major logo in India, in Gurgaon or in Hyderabad or elsewhere, you shouldn't be able to tell that you are in India or in the US or in Switzerland or Germany. So spot on. And I think we are seeing that trend emerge where we are seeing, capability centers and leaders and sponsors of those initiatives take that step to say, we are now Company X India. Now, this obviously, sometimes, that particular company already has an India P&L, and so there can be a little difference. But most GCCs, out of the 200 odd that are existing, are not all that operate in India as that particular vertical. So yes, should the answer be we're just another office? but we are a truer ecosystem of that particular company in India, because we tend to have all functions all set up together, and actually can know more and do more from here
Fair enough.
than a fragment set of offices that might exist in the global HQ or global country of origin, for that matter.
Okay, fair point. Okay, so Snehil, as far as the BCG reports data is concerned, we were, of course, both of us discussing the fact that 2035 is a projection in terms of 5,000 GCCs, etc. You're saying that there is a robust movement which is taking place, 2 per week, etc. But then this is something which is, I don't know, an anomaly maybe, because fewer than 50% of Fortune 500 companies use the GCC model at real scale, despite over 10,000 hubs already existing worldwide. Now, that's what I want to ask you. Is there actually room to grow, or proof that most companies have tried this and decided it isn't worth it?
So actually, Sudhi, let me take the last point first, right?
Sure.
About companies that have tried it and have felt that it is not worth it, to your point. So actually, that is not really happening at all. There are a few instances where the model may have changed from going back from certain skills, moving from a own capability hub to, let's say, a third party provider partner, which is an outsourcing model. But for the most part, we are seeing more and more global organizations believe that there is IP and talent and career growth as asks that actually compel them to move away from a typical traditional outsourcing model into a version of having their own center set up here, or set of centers set up here. Now, why do I say that? For 3 reasons. One, of course, is that the talent available now has deep domain expertise. We're not talking 30 years back when you had to teach somebody about banking in America or insurance or a particular pharma industry, right? People had now 30 years to know what that is. So there's deep domain expertise available in both the function as well as the industry.
Okay.
The second part is that there is a strong ask from folks to say, look, I would like continuity. I'd like to invest in Sudhi as a leader, and then help him grow his career with us and keep that knowledge with us.
And by the way, I'm open to that. Anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And third, of course, is how do you then translate this into a competitive advantage, amongst your peers, right? Where they're leveraging different models. What that then means is that the growth that you're seeing now, post-COVID particularly, says, COVID showed us that, look, there are many roles that can happen globally. So why be compelled to say, these roles must be in the geographical confines of North America or Europe or what have you?
Fair point.
Second, there is a very big talent gap that exists of specialized skills. Availability of talent is getting more scarce in certain areas for sure, whether in Western Europe or North America.
Yep.
And the third point, of course, is the fact that India presents a very credible opportunity to bring all these things together and deliver value, and now deliver impact, which I think is I think the underlying part of why not just go to a provider to get that value, but why do it on your own?
Fair point. Okay. Now, which then logically brings me to this thought then, Snehil, that, a lot of the centers, and I want you to please educate us on this, a lot of the centers are becoming genuine decision-making and innovation hubs. I will come to the talent and the R&D aspects post this. Others still kind of remain trapped doing what probably the head offices are guiding them to do. But I would like for you to then shed light on this. What's the real difference between those two? And can most Indian GCCs actually make that jump? Or were they built for the second category from day one? And are you seeing that evolution take place?
No, I think that's a great point. Look, the starting position is the strategic nature of the GCC in the enterprise. It begins with a mandate and sponsorship, right? Because the idea has to emanate from some place typically. And this is not then a talent problem.
Okay.
Execution-led GCCs can have very strong people, but if the mandate is very narrow and the sponsorship sits too far down, then that naturally limits the seniority of the roles you can build, the type of problems you can solve for, and hence the influence that the GCC can have on the end impact or the value that we're striving to get. So sponsorship matters enormously. I think a GCC sponsor at the right level starts with a very different ambition. It can attract stronger leadership, let's say locally in India. It can take on more consequential capabilities because you can go and talk about the work that you have done before or others are doing. And most importantly, you get a seat at all the right tables. So the proximity of the business matters because the team understands the context behind a decision rather than simply receiving a task and then actioning it and what comes out of it. Right?
Sure.
The second part is the operating model. If the GCC is structured as an internal service provider, that is, work is defined elsewhere, it's broken into tasks and handed over to you. That's the old model. Of course, then the center will work on a delivery mindset. But I think the centers that are more strategic are more integrated, with the global functions and businesses. So what you're carving out are things that are more end-to-end, more wholesome, which allow at different layers of the organization to do work, but also to grow and deliver impact. So they solve problems jointly rather than just taking, parts of a work downstream and saying, hey, look, it's 5 p.m. here. Here's something for you to do, and I'll see you in the morning with that work done, which is how this began.
Correct.
So I think the nuance here, Sudhi, is that not all GCCs are the same. Product and engineering-led GCCs, by the way, can often have much more natural end-to-end ownership because the work is organized around a product or a part of a product. If you're a car company that has a ER&D center in India, you could be working on the next Viper blade that is gonna go out in all those sedans across the globe. Or if you're a phone company, you're designing a part of the next new model of a smartphone here. I think service-oriented GCCs, because they have a lot more of the process part of things, have this bit about having more of a execution-oriented mindset. So I think there isn't one maturity model that applies equally.
Okay.
I think it's a loop of what I call compounding trust, right? If the leaders on both sides, agree on a meaningful problem to solve with the right sponsorship, then that gives you a chance to demonstrate value, right? And that becomes the true mandate that you run with. Also, leadership changes, right? So you had a certain mandate. If you haven't leveraged that mandate to do great work, then as leadership changes, the philosophy of what the new leader might or might not want to do in a global talent model can also change. So I think if we look ahead, the gap between GCCs will widen. There will be GCCs that will continue to do the smaller, process-oriented work, whereas I think there will be newer and newer GCCs and the ones that have been there a while that are transforming that will take on the mantle of driving more product ownership, platform ownership, and sometimes even within the same GCC, certain functional leaders take a larger punt and say, look, this is what I want my team in India to do, whereas others may not take that approach as well. So I think strategic hubs, as we want to think of these, are where you're not just framing the question, you're jointly working to solve it, and you're demonstrating value without being told to demonstrate value. And that onus lies on the leaders that get hired and on folks like us that help clients, imagine what the future can look like. And they need to see that. And as we and many others serve clients globally, it's our prerogative to be able to say what's the, in BCG parlance, we call possible.
Okay, so very quickly, I want you to go ahead and shed light on this then, Snehil. You said that the gap is widened or it will keep widening. According to your data, for example, or for example, whatever you've observed, how many are very still, very service-oriented, sticking to the old model, vis-a-vis how many are truly innovation hubs that have taken place? Also, very important according to me, that the leadership needs to be in India if they need to go ahead and ensure that they are changing the overall landscape or the way the entire mental makeup, etc. is. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think when you talk about statistics, Sudhi, right, I think we find that in many of the newly set up GCCs, they start typically with a little bit of a stronger urge to solve a problem. And that problem could be, how do I, for example, look at, AI for underwriting if I'm an insurance company, or if I am a alcobev maker, can I bring AI to shorten my cycle in how I do marketing activities, right? So there are very specific business problems that newer GCCs tend to come to India with when they think about it, not when they action, but when they're thinking about it. The logos that have been here 5, 10, 15, 20 years are already doing a certain body of work that has been providing value to the organization for a long time. That work is going through its own cycle of saying, can I make this less people dependent and more agentic in its thinking? And we can talk a little bit more about how AI is being deployed in a second.
Sure.
So I think you have those two sort of areas that you look at when you look at the GCCs of today. I think the nature of folks that are doing cutting edge work today in newer GCCs is very high. More than 50% of the GCCs that are coming in today are coming in taking the mantle of saying, I would like to have product ownership or platform ownership, or have AI-led
That's
centers of
encouraging.
excellence here. I think the GCCs that have been here a while are sometimes taking a little bit longer to move up that curve because they are trying to look at making sure that what has happening today keeps happening, yet they invest more in future centers of excellence. I think the key thing to note is AI is not a GCC problem. AI is an enterprise problem.
I think it's a human
GCC
problem, to be honest, Snehil, if you ask me. That's my thought.
Indeed. And so I think when we talk about saying, look, are GCCs adopting AI, or will AI influence the number of people that get hired in GCCs? I think that's the wrong question to ask.
Correct.
I think the question to ask is, can these GCCs be a solution to ensuring the enterprise needs of GenAI or AI are being met, through the India GCC, partly or wholly? And I think the smarter organizations are looking to say it is not the GenAI for the GCC, it's GenAI for the enterprise.
Fair enough. Okay, so since we are of course on the topic of AI, I want to ask you this then, in terms of the real shift, because the old model used to be about the labor arbitrage aspect and an understanding that seems to be obviously fading away, and it should, in a way, kind of evolve towards how AI is progressing. But I want to ask you this, in terms of the way companies are using AI to redesign work itself, not just speed up existing processes. Could you give us an example, for example, that a job that got redesigned from scratch and it was done not just to make things faster, but a true innovation? And I'm not talking about FDEs.
Of course. And I'll come to your example, Sudhi, in a second. But I think, as I mentioned, right, the intent is not about automating work, it's about rethinking work.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example, right? It's not about how can I do this task faster. It's about saying, should this particular task exists at all. So let's take an example of if I'm processing a claim, for someone who's insured. The intent was, well, you have a policy. I will check if you're covered. You will send me some supporting documentation. I will check that documentation. There'll be missing cogs and pieces of it. And so I will ask you for more information. There's a loop between you and me going back and forth. I think the way GenAI is now being applied is not just saying, can I do the evaluation faster? It's to actually say, can I understand the enormity of what is missing and let's say the risk profile of Sudhi to say, is that particular missing element going to matter at all? Which is not typically what you would see before. So the idea of asking for more documentation as a process step can be eliminated for many cases because GenAI has been able to build the model to say, look, I think profiles of people of this kind missing this document from a hospital or from a accident scene of this kind doesn't require me to be able to very, very confidently approve a claim. So this is an example where we're not automating an existing process.
Sure.
We're rethinking the process by itself. And what is GenAI is now doing is building this as a foundation on top of which agentic AI then comes in to say, how can I make this process more independent, more faster, less risk prone, more responsible, and all the other things that you and I read about in terms of a Gen AI driven process. So I think AI cannot be a substitute to get the underlying process right. I think we need collectively, humanly, to be able to think of the intelligence about what we do and why. Because, as you know, our processes themselves have evolved over decades, right? What was, as let's say, a KYC process didn't exist, a few decades ago. It's now that you're building those things in. So we are thinking now for the future that we would do that. And in this context, I think, if I look at our research, our study shows that, only 4% of companies typically have developed, advanced AI and Gen AI capabilities, are getting actual value. So the value gap is that you can deploy capabilities, you can invest, but the value outcomes are still not emerging. And part of that is because, in the entire pie, as I said, 70% of value will come from process change.
Yes.
And 10% from being able to design the best algorithm and another 20 from the tech stack that you would use. So that's the fundamental premise that I think we need to make sure organizations both here and at the enterprise HQ level get right.
Snehil, sorry, let me connect the dots. As far as the report is concerned, we always, of course, when it comes down to India, we are always, very, very celebratory as far as our talent is concerned, which is true. It truly is. It's a powerhouse. But here's something, when you talked about value, right? Here's something which I'd like for you to go ahead and elaborate on. As far as the overall call to action is concerned, we're talking about talent scale, which is an advantage. Now, in terms of the overall perspective of a bottleneck or a constraint, I personally feel, do you feel it is capital and R&D investment that, honestly, talent can't fix? And maybe that is what is somewhere a stumbling block in terms of the true value addition. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So I think if the question, Sudhi, if I got it right, is it between talent scale or domain expertise?
It's talent scale, and from that point of view, the investment perspective. Because until and unless that investment doesn't come in, talent can't really do,
So I personally think it's not an either or question, right? Talent scale and the value point we offered with the competency in the language, etc., is what got us here, right? I think, but what I think has led to the scale up in growth, as I mentioned early on, is the domain expertise that we have built and a flourishing local innovation ecosystem, right? So if you look at it, our starting point is, we've heard this number of the 3 odd million people that are employed
Correct.
today, across GCCs in India, right? We have one of the largest AI talent pools hitting 1 million people, and outside of the West Coast in the US and maybe China, this is where that group is, and rising much faster. But if you go back to domain expertise, right, we've been serving different industries across wide functions for over 25 plus years. Right?
Correct.
India is known to be, for example, the capital of where global books are closed. So today
Yes.
in finance, if you want any skill in any industry, around accounting, around closing, around controllership, around analysis, you can find that easily across levels.
Yes.
So complex things like hedging, to treasury, to tax, all of that happens here. Take retail banking, for instance, right? We are the powerhouse of the world. But now this is also been accentuated by the fact that we now have truly global leaders that operate out of India. This
Yes.
30-year thing means that people have now evolved to global ways of working, who can manage global teams, who can be part of global teams, and created a leadership pipeline that is second to none. I think the third advantage is the local innovation ecosystem, right? So the GCCs today are tapping, the 200 odd thousand startups in India, the 120 odd unicorns that happen to be in India, and using that to feed insights back, globally, whether it's our payment ecosystem, UPI,
Sure.
you look at what's happening in a quick commerce space. A lot of that is now fueling reverse growth to banks globally, and that is what I think is the combination that makes really India compelling. Because of course we have numbers, and one of our strengths is the young demographic and the large population we
Correct.
have. That does help. I think the next frontier is, how do we translate all of this into proprietary IP, for India, and also really translate into true Gen AI capabilities that are not middle of the layer, but more across the entire Gen AI ecosystem. So I think delivery capability at scale was our foundation. That will stay. But I think the newer things that we are doing are going to be the one that take us to the next decade, in what's happening globally, in terms of technology, and/or other compelling, global talent model, arguments.
Snehil, I want to ask you this, and I want your honest take on this. For the last 2 decades, 3 decades, as you've mentioned, yes, you're absolutely bang on. The fact that, we have been the last mile in a big way for the world, right? And we've built our middle class as far as the country is concerned on that. So kudos to that. That is wonderful. But also, there has been this constant narrative and discussion about the fact that we need to move up the value chain. And I completely concur with that, right? This time around, according to you, are we going to be doing that? Because obviously we have AI now in the picture. Is that going to assist in a big way? Also, do you feel that with, let's say, Gen Z, or for that matter, the newer mindset, will that also kind of go ahead and, in some way or the other, encourage everyone to start really saying, okay, wait a minute, we really need to move up the value chain as a country, and then globally, everyone sits up and takes notice, and the entire wave goes through a very different sort of a navigation.
So, Sudhi, I think this question of, are we delivering value, are we going up the value curve, etc., I think is valid, but I think it's getting a little, redundant in my view, because of two reasons. First, of course, one should not be looking at a GCC in singularity. the GCC in India, like you said, is just one arm of a global enterprise. A global enterprise cannot expect that the GCC by itself is doing something extraordinary while they are doing something average, right? So, one of my clients is very particular when they were thinking of naming their GCC, and there are GCCs that are named innovation centers,
Sure.
GICs and what have you. And she had a great point. She's like, it doesn't mean that innovation is only going to happen in India, right? The India is just another location for us. And if we are doing bad work in terms of manual work here, manual work in India is just as bad as it is here. And so, if we're going to try and drive innovation, we have to try and drive innovation across the enterprise. So, from the angle of saying, are GCCs delivering value and impact? The answer is that part of it is the culture within the organization to really rethink, like we said, processes to do a lot more faster, quicker, better than the others. Because in honesty, the India arm will do a little bit more in productivity gains, and we have data to show that typical GCCs year on year deliver 6 to 8% productivity even for mature GCCs, which is typically more than what you would see at HQ. And the reason for that is twofold. One, because India GCCs typically are microcosms of the entire company. They can see things broken much faster than you can see across a bunch of offices, let's say in the US for a particular client. And second, because most of the folks in India are very aspirational in careers. So they're looking for the next leg up and are automatically very motivated to say, how can I do something better, faster, etc. So that's the traditional productivity lens. But to deliver true value and impact, we have to go beyond that. And that transformation has to be a joint effort between HQ and India, because it requires not saying I will deploy capabilities only for the GCC, but it will be deploying capabilities that are maybe thought of in the GCC, but are deployed across, because processes typically are running across. And so I think it's not a Gen Z or the type of talent we hire model. It's about the combination of the leadership here, the sponsors for that initiative there, and their underlying belief in how GenAI or any new technology can really help them deliver more shareholder value, more customer, NPS improvements, and eventually, a better, outcome for the organization.
Okay, fair point, but I don't agree with you. Why I'm saying
Okay.
that is because of this. Michael Cronin, who is the managing director of Couchbase, I've had very, very, elaborate discussions with him. He is somebody who's gone ahead and spoken to me at length about the overall ecosystem. He's somebody who's the decision maker. And the way he puts it across, Snehil, and it's not just him. I've had conversations with Genpact, etc., whatever. The basic conversation again and again is coming back to that entire bit where HQ is now going ahead and saying we need a leadership mindset in terms of the hiring that we are doing, because we would like for us to use that entire experience of the last 20, 30 years, as far as at least the way we work, and for the lack of a better term, if I want to call it jugaad, but let's be honest, that is something where we have been fabulous at in terms of going ahead and creating fabulous solutions for the world over. That's why I'm asking you that, Snehil. And time and again, they've talked about it from that point of view, where they're saying they're looking at India from that new lens now. That's why I thought I'll probably...
No. Look, I think you and I are saying the same thing. So I think if the question is, should we be asking more of our leaders? Absolutely.
Yes.
Because in our leaders, in our talent pool, there is a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3, right? There are leaders who, either because of experience or lack thereof, their vision is very executional and very FTE centric. Because keep in mind, 30 years ago when outsourcing began, everybody measured their self-worth, including the providers, oh, we won a deal of X million with X thousand people. Service delivery leaders in these organizations said, I manage a team of 500 or 5,000.
Correct.
Everybody had that as a way to define their self-worth. But I think today there are leaders who are very, very capable, of turning work away, saying, hey, this work is, I'm making it up, working, at a shift which doesn't make sense, is not the right scale, is too piecemeal. There are many such leaders. So I think the challenge then is, are the sponsors of the initiative making sure they're tapping those leaders who carry that influence to walk the halls in HQ and be able to tell the leaders on their face, saying, look, I think we can help you with this. These are the 5 roles that I don't think belong in India, because they need to be closer to the customer or closer to reaction. And it's not worth having someone work a 8 p.m. to a 5 a.m. shift in India.
Agreed.
Because it's not enough scale or value. There are people like that. I think the question is everybody like that? Not at all. And so there will be basis both demand, as in a pull, and a push, where some of the leaders that have measured their self-worth basis how large of a team they run, or just taking whatever comes, that will move on. And that is happening. And that's been happening not just now, it's been happening for the past, I'd say, decade or so. Of course, there are some logos that have done a better job at it, some that have not. But that's been quite prevalent. And I do believe, and I'm optimistic, that more and more leaders will want that seat at the table, which says, I know the business, I know the work, I can contribute more than simply saying, here are the KPIs or metrics that you ought to deliver. And that is happening, and that's, I think, that's a heartwarming trend to see happen across the industry.
That's encouraging. I want to ask you this, Snehil. That 2035 target that I'd mentioned earlier. Both of us probably believe that, yes, we are headed in the right direction, etc. But then this is something which I feel, and I pondered about this quite a few times, I feel that, the tier 2 and the tier 3 needs to really fire for us to kind of reach that point. Now, very recently, the Punjab government has made an announcement. They're making it very, very viable for a lot of GCCs to come down and set up. Now, I know I've had these discussions in the past as well, that yes, the infrastructure still needs a lot of doing as far as tier 2 and tier 3 is concerned, which is obviously logical for people to take a decision. But from your very experienced position, you're very deeply ensconced in the system, you're constantly, having conversations with the leaders. How does the mindset of a leader work, Snehil? For example, like a Punjab. Now, there are various things which have been subsidized, etc. Talent is there, universities are there, etc., etc. But what will trigger that decision to say, okay, I will not go to a Bengaluru and I will go to a Punjab?
So, look, I think, Sudhi, there is no doubt that the global talent model ecosystem that we've created creates very meaningful jobs and contributes to the economy, both of the country and the state.
Sure.
Which is basically meant that many states, and at last count, at least 12 states have official policies supporting investments and incentives for both GCCs and ITES providers, right? And every state is now trying to get ahead of the other.
Correct.
Now, I think what matters, and it's a little different for different flavors, but if I am a existing GCC that has a tier 1 footprint, and in our case, tier 1 is typically 6 cities that are very commonly known, then I can consider, and I have scale, I can consider a tier 2 city, for either being a specialized hub for a particular function. For example, I could say, look, I am looking at statisticians for work around actuarial for insurance, or looking at analytics players that will do FP&A or an AI ML kind of work, and I will pick a tier 2 city of X or Y because they have a very large, let's say, university ecosystem that fires. That model can work because you already have a base and a hub in a tier 1 city.
Sure.
But I think for a new entrant, I think their first question, depending on scale and size, is also going to be, how do I get there? Is there, good international connectivity to get there?
Fair.
How, where will I attract talent from? Is the local ecosystem highly competitive, which can work to my advantage and disadvantage?
Sure.
Advantage because I already have my peers in that city. I can draw talent from them. I get domain expertise, and I had great credible talent to build on. And I have a local ecosystem of universities that can work. Now, what does that come with? That might come with slightly higher attrition, higher cost of real estate, higher compensation. But ultimately, what are you coming to India for? You're coming to India for good talent. Because there is already enough economic value that even if you paid a little bit more for real estate, that may not be the deal breaker. So I think it's easier done for existing players to think of tier 2 cities, to grow this ecosystem. For newer players coming in, I'm afraid that as of right now, the draw of only incentives may not be enough to be able to draw them straight to a tier 2. I think it also matters about the kind of scale you're looking at. If you are looking at a very large scale, then the concern also can be, does the tier 2, can that support my ecosystem of my growth and demand? And then the obvious choice becomes, okay, let's start in one of these larger locations. And we have a vision already that we will do the next center will be in a tier 2.
Okay.
I do believe that that earlier logos developed centers 1, 2, 3 in all these 6 tier 1 cities. I think that trend is changing. I think we are seeing more than larger entrants of new who have ventured into other tier 2 cities, in many states, from Rajasthan, Punjab, and
Lucknow, Snehil.
UP, exactly.
Yes.
Even Gujarat, right?
True.
Ahmedabad has centers as well. So we are seeing that happen. I do think that incentives is not going to be the only way. I think international connectivity is a big draw, and a big factor in the minds of clients that we serve to consider. But I think the fact that there are more and more governments waking up to saying, how can I create more high value add employment opportunities? How do I proposition clients to consider this? I think that's a great sign. It just helps make sure that you can find talent closer to where they're coming from. It also will reduce the strain on some of our larger cities, which today are
that's a big
large,
issue.
and infra growth that is required to go with that. So I think I'm very optimistic that tier 2s will pick up, but I think tier 2s will pick up a lot more and have with third-party providers, which I think where it's a little bit more of a easier decision because it's in their hands, and they do have footprint across several cities in India, for instance, already.
Snehil, tell me this very quickly. I'd like to kind of follow up a little bit on this. If, let's say, you were to advise the government, because, obviously you're dealing with various clients globally. Now, if you were to advise the government, like you mentioned, incentives is obviously not the only thing that is going to, in some way or the other, court these global players to come in. What would you like to tell them? Like, for example, the UP government, they're trying to make a big push. The Punjab government is trying to do it. Now, if they were to accelerate this entire process, somebody like you yourself could probably play a very key role. What would you like to say to them?
Yeah. So actually, we are actually very honored that we do work with many of these states already on their broader, policies for the state growth. And, I think there are a few things that I think are very important for the states to consider. I think one, of course, is basically being able to cultivate and nurture a talent ecosystem that is far deeper. When I say what I mean is, oftentimes we find that the quality of talent available differs greatly between a tier one school and a tier two school and a tier three school as in
Fair point.
college, right? And so we find that India has actually done really well in being able to take people from tier three colleges, run them through a finishing school, train them, and get them to levels that can make them contribute immediately when they join a
Sure.
organization. I think running skilling programs, which many states are now doing, right, is a massive uplift to be able to say it tells them what skills are in demand. It essentially empowers them to skill the population at their cost.
Right.
And then many states are offering incentives if you hire local domiciled
Yeah.
talent as well. So what that does is, if you are able to develop this partnership between the state and the organization that's coming to that state and say, look, I am looking for skills in these areas, and the state is offering and saying, look, I will train 300 people in this skill. That cost is mine. I will, you hire from this pool. You can take your pick. That is outstanding. Right now, a lot of the conversations around skilling happen between a GCC and a local college, to help define
Correct.
curriculum
Yes.
or shape curriculums. I think having that happen at a state level, I think just improves employability and the ability to be productive from day one. And I think for us as a country, narrowing the gap between tier one, two, and three is in our interest, because it allows
Yes.
local talent to flourish and also allows the growth of our state, tier two cities, and then reduces the burden on these larger metropolises
Absolutely.
that we are all talking about.
And the fact that, Snehil, at the end of the day, it will lower the attrition rate. People will be happier not to leave their homes and, go like 9,000 miles away, etc. And it'll help the company as well. It'll help the global headquarters as well. And they'll be able to go way deeper in terms of their investments when it comes down to an institutional knowledge, because they'll be able to train, they'll be able to go ahead and really hone the skills as far as people are concerned. But a very valid point that you've made, and I really hope that the states are listening and they pay heed to what you've just spoken about. Finally, in conclusion, Snehil, it's been a wonderful conversation, but I would like for you to probably give your message to that young engineer who's probably starting off his life journey, and what would you like to say to him or her? And is this an exciting landscape that they probably can go ahead and benefit from?
So thank you, Sudesh, for the opportunity. And I think in closing, what I'd like to say is that, look, I think the world has evolved dramatically to truly being, having workforce strategy become a global topic. And, global talent models are not something that for the most part need to be educated, to clients globally. They think of it, they know it. I think the credibility extremely high. And I think including at the junior levels to the leadership levels. So you are starting off with a great foundation. I think what is now important is to come in and really commit to saying you will also be that voice of change, the voice of transformation in a setup. And I think plan your careers well. I think what is important is to pick the type of work you do and who you do your work for. That I think is going to be critical as you think of your longer term journey. And I think for all of us, including folks like myself, I think skilling is not a one-off. It's a lifelong
correct.
journey. I think if you're not carving out time to read, to upskill yourself, then I think you're gonna bear the brunt of that as things evolve, because the world is moving very, very
True.
fast, and each one of us should be carving out time to read, to learn, to ask questions. Whether it's GenAI, whether it's new models, whether it's how geopolitics is working out. All of that actually helps make you a more rounded professional and makes you have a higher probability of success as you work. But I think this is a great time for talent in India to be contributing not just to India's growth, but to the growth of global organizations.
Fabulously put, Snehil. It's been a true pleasure having this conversation. And as we are obviously going to keep moving on, chugging along as far as the GCC highway is concerned, I'd request you to keep coming back with your wonderful insights and how probably the milestones will be achieved in the road ahead.
Wonderful, Sudesh. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. And I look forward to catching up again with you as well.
Fabulous. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. BCG's report puts a lot of the numbers front and center in the spotlight. And I believe it's very important. It's extremely important for us to constantly ruminate on those numbers, learn from them, understand them, and then accordingly go ahead and reassess and move. And I guess what Snehil has been constantly talking about is the fact that, yes, times are changing and they are probably changing for the better. Policy needs to go ahead and bolster that. We need to have an ecosystem which is bolstering it. And finally, we need to make sure that we are constantly innovating because, well, that's probably the name of the game. Please like, share, subscribe. Think AI, think AI.